Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Free Thought Prophet Podcast. I am Seamus. Essays have been published just on his small talk. He has made day drinking a sporting event. His timeshare is in the Mariana Trench, and he's the only man that has ever aced the Rorschach test. He is, of course, John Hamill.
Well, day drinking being an important term. This is earlier than usual for us, so I'm on the hot cough soother drink just at the moment. Although I should say, being on its Father's Day and all,
There you
I've done pretty well.
go.
So
Well done.
I shall certainly enjoy that a bit later. Um, but today we're going to speak with Randolf Richardson, who is a Canadian who advocates for freedom, human rights, justice, science literacy, and critical thinking. And although his focus is primarily on Canada, his hope is for everyone throughout the world to have freedom complemented by fact-based secular education. And that's because he believes that freedom combined with literacy, particularly scientific literacy, leads to better quality living for everyone. So this should be a fun conversation with Randolph.
Yeah, but anytime we talk to somebody in Canada, it's always a good time. So
That's true. That's true. Much more polite than us, unfortunately.
that's it.
Then we'll have to take it.
That's it.
Cool. Okay, so let's get Randolph.
Welcome to the Free Thought Prophet, Randolph Richardson.
Well, thank you.
Great to get the chance to talk with you, Randolph. And yeah, we've a bunch of questions we're hoping to work through. If you don't mind, a bit of a cliche question to start with, though. We tend to ask a lot of guests about their own personal background. May I ask if you had a religious upbringing that you had to find your way out of somehow, or were you spared that particular chore?
Well, I've always been an atheist. I can remember at one point when we moved to a new neighborhood, the neighbors had invited us, and my father is a skeptic. He teaches me and my brother to be critical thinkers as best he can.
Excellent.
So we went just to humor the neighbors, I suppose, and the pastor was talking about, or the priest, or whatever his title was, he was talking about people, how God and the devil are enemies, and then if you go to hell, you're going to burn forever. So, of course, being a young, curious kid, I found this contradiction to be rather peculiar. So I turned to my dad and asked him about it, and he said, well, why don't we ask the pastor on the way out? So we did, and so I wasn't happy with the answers the pastor was giving. He was one of those meet and greet and at the door people at the beginning and end of the church. And so he was saying, oh, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and I wasn't accepting that answer, so I asked for more info, and I just kept pressing, and he was starting to get kind of nervous and looking at my dad, okay, move this kid along kind of thing. So the next weekend that we went, we were made to feel very unwelcome and just didn't end up attending. So that was the end of it. I guess they didn't like questions.
Oh dear. Well, I suspect they didn't like the fact that they couldn't answer the questions more than the questions themselves. That expression, the Lord works in mysterious ways, I have to say, more than almost any other religious apologetics, that tends to annoy me a lot, especially here in Ireland, where there's a strong Catholic influence. Normally what that means is the Lord works in mysterious ways, unless you ask about condoms. Apparently then they have a direct line to the Lord and they know exactly what the Lord thinks. It's not at least bit mysterious in that case.
I guess there's geographically, and you kind of have, it's split into two political lines. I guess you have, was it like Northern and Southern Ireland or something like that?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So one part is, of course, more secular than the other, and does that create some challenges, or do you guys have a strict border that prevents people from traveling? Or
yeah, I suppose both have become more secular than they used to be. But the southern part of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, from its inception, the country had a really strong Roman Catholic influence. And the Protestant denomination in the south was really very small. In the north, the jurisdiction was really set up by design to have a Protestant majority, but the Roman Catholic minority was a large minority, if you know what I mean. It was 45%, and it's growing. So the two sides were close enough in size that they bounced off each other quite a lot, if I can use that expression. And when I say bounced off each other, I mean often with bombs and bullets. Whereas in the south, there just wasn't any kind of contest. It was a country with a Roman Catholic hegemony. So both of them have been becoming more secular over time, and I would say the populations in both jurisdictions are at the minute far more secular than the statute book. So there's still a lot of old legislation that privileges religion, and we're slowly chipping away at it. So we managed to bring in marriage equality. We got rid of the constitutional prohibition on abortion. We got rid of the constitutional prohibition on blasphemy. So we're getting there, but we've got a long way to go, unfortunately.
We just recently redacted some anti-blasphemy legislation here. Yes. That was part of our criminal code, yeah.
You beat us to the punch, I believe. You got there before Ireland.
Well, it seemed like a very long process here. Once the polling was over, the petition was over, then it took a while to go through the various government processes, and then after the politicians vote on it, it has to go through Senate for final approval and assent and all that. So and that's kind of a slow process, but we're overall very happy that this worked out. It's good. I find it strange when religious people complain about anti-blasphemy legislation being canceled, because it protects them as well from being accused by people from competing denominations or from competing religions from accusing them of things as well.
Yes, indeed.
They have freedom of expression, which should definitely be a higher precedent than that.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
And actually, the debate in Ireland has referred to the Canadian model quite a lot, especially with respect to education. So one of the big difficulties that we have here is that the vast majority of our state-funded school system is funded through public funds, but managed by the Roman Catholic Church. And it's often said that the church involvement is much too entrenched and it's just too difficult to get rid of. But people often cite the model of Quebec and other parts of Canada. I believe there used to be a strong Catholic influence in state-funded schools, and that has been eroded over time.
Well, interesting thing about Canada that quite a few people aren't aware of is all the provinces except for Quebec have officially joined Confederation. There's a big question mark hanging over Quebec on that. So where you'll see Quebec doing some very controversial things that look like they don't always fit with our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because they haven't joined Confederation, technically they get to pick and choose.
Okay.
Generally, they go along with our Constitution because I think they like it. Is a big one. We do have very strong protections for our freedoms here, and there is, I think, a bit of a flip going on there. I live in BC, the other end of the country, the western end, and here, what I'm seeing with education over the years, especially the last 5 years or so, that there has been an emphasis on teaching children more critical thinking skills. And so this is a plus. The downside is we still have religious schools can get special funding, and that funding can be taken redirected out of the public system, and that's a concern for me because that kind of erodes the public system.
Sure.
They already get tax-exempt status. Most of the private schools here end up aligning with a religion, so a religious institution of some sort. And I suspect many of them, it's just so that they can get the tax-exempt status. But there are others that really genuinely are religious schools too. So
what got you to become an atheist advocate? What got you involved into all this wonderful stuff that we get to deal with?
Well, it's something that I would have to say came about gradually. It's not something that just happened overnight for me. I know for some people it has. There have been some people who've been a great inspiration as well, such as Christopher Hitchens would be right at the top of the list there, as I think he is for a lot of people. Yeah, and I see what happens is I see people are discriminating against people for arbitrary reasons, such as, you're not following the same religion, so therefore you're bad. And those are the kinds of things that I am against. One particular thing I noticed was there was a lot of this arbitrary vilification of atheists, attempts at it anyway. Yeah. Some successful, many not. And so I'm making a number of efforts to try to counter that. On our CanadianAtheists.ca website, there's a section called Tips, which we put up a series of over 60 memes of what we call intellectual safety tips. And they're all describing the various things that atheism is not. Yeah. And it can very easily become a much longer list. It's mainly in response to different criticisms, unfair criticisms that I've seen over the years. And so that's what most of those points address. Like, for example, it'll say atheism is not hateful, atheism is not a religion, these kinds of things. So it's just going that way, just kind of process of elimination kind of approach to it. There is, I think where this comes from a lot of the time is this vilification is in Christianity in particular. There's a portion in the Bible that states that either you're with God or you're against him. Yep. And so it creates a false dichotomy or a bifurcation type of false dichotomy. Yep. In fact, that people will think, oh, well, if you're not religious, you must hate God if you don't love him. And this kind of thinking comes up. So I'm trying to change that. And I've even encountered a few people online who claim not to be religious, and yet they're trying to prove proof on atheists, saying, well, if you're not a theist, you must be taking a position that deities don't exist. And no, that's not what atheism is. Yeah. Atheism is all very freedom-centered. It is that one thing that brings us all together in a classificational sense of just not having a belief in deities. And some people have reasons for that, some do not. Some people, I was just this way all my life. I don't actually have a justification for it. Now, I don't consider that to be rational or irrational. It's just the way I am. But there do seem to be a lot of attempts to pigeonhole people like myself as anti-theists when we're not. And they'll say, okay, you have a burden of proof. I'll say, well, okay, what claim or assertion have I made here with regard to this? And of course, they draw a blank because we haven't done this. Yes. So this is the kind of thing I'm trying to change. I've created a website called defineatheism.com, which goes into great detail on the linguistic structure, the logic behind it, the etymology, and cites over 30 references, including dictionaries and some professional philosophers, like people who teach philosophy in accredited universities. So we're trying to make sure that we have all this stuff well laid out for anybody who needs it to be able to say, look, this is who we are, and here's some good reasoning behind it.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted to hear you say that, Randolph. We got into a little trouble a short while ago.
What happened?
We published an episode on an interview that Professor Brian Cox did with Russell Brand on Russell Brand's podcast. And
Cox does some great stuff.
All of his kind of science documentaries, I love them up. I think they're really great. But at one point, Russell Brand said, "Oh, you're famously an atheist, Brand, isn't that right?" And Brand Cox said, "No, I reject the label because I think it's divisive." And I just thought that, there's absolutely nothing divisive about saying you're an atheist, and he would never say that about Islam or Christianity or any other religion. If someone had been in the studio and said, "Well, I'm a Muslim," there's no way he would have turned around and said, "Well, it's very divisive for you to say you believe in Islam." So yeah, I think on one level, I don't want to sound like atheists should be kind of wallowing in victimhood, that we're oppressed by terrible discriminations. There's other people who are worse off than us. Against that, if there's a particular stigma in relation to the word, it's well worth trying to correct that stigma, and what you've done sounds like it's very useful in that regard.
Yeah, I am. I'm definitely working that direction. I remember Neil deGrasse Tyson, another famous astrophysicist, and doing wonderful work as well in the field of science, and also dabbling in philosophy in some really good ways.
Yep.
He's doing very well with it all. I have great respect for him also. He initially was telling people, "Oh, I'm not atheist, I'm agnostic." And so what happens, there was, I suspect where some of this comes from too, is in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. It used to say, until the beginning of this year, December 2018 and January 2019, Merriam-Webster finally changed the definition of atheism.
Oh,
and
that's
removed
interesting.
the part
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they removed the portion that says atheism is the doctrine that there is no God. And I had written a letter to them years ago, not knowing that David Silverman was doing the same thing at the same time.
Okay.
I probably did it around that time, that I stated, look, you guys are defining this, but you're not stating what the doctrine is. And then you cite etymology, which doesn't agree or support your definition.
Yeah.
So please correct it. Here's what I suggest you do. And I wrote it as nicely as I could, and I explained the linguistic structure and everything. And so I like to think that maybe what I did had a little bit of impact. But
for sure.
After finding out that David Silverman got a lot of people doing this, I suspect probably it was more his work that did it, because he got so many people writing letters. Oxford already had the right definition. I pointed that out to them as well. So it's fairly... I'm careful not to use the word lack. I prefer to use the word absence of belief, because the problem with the word lack is it kind of implies that there's something that should be there that's missing. Absence is more neutral in that sense.
Quite right.
Yeah, so in the U.S., excuse me, atheism is on the rise, but we still don't get a proper rap, so to speak. We don't have proper or positive kind of representation. It's just kind of, we're the nuns. We're just supposed to go along with whatever the theist representatives are going to put out. Is this also an issue in Canada?
It is a little bit, not so much. I noticed that religion is much stronger and more personal for people in the U.S. than it is here in Canada. Here, generally, I find a lot of people are pretty easygoing with it. Oh, you're not part of my religion, that's okay. Whereas what I hear from a lot of people in the U.S. is there is quite a strong expectation from many religious people that everyone should conform to the same standard or two, such as with certain evangelical groups in particular. There is generally people are more easygoing here is what I've noticed. But that's just my perspective as a Canadian. Although I have American friends who've told me they've noticed that as well. So, in the U.S. they have two political parties. So the society seems to be quite divided, I've noticed, over either your one party or the other.
Yep.
And so that seems to flow into the thinking with their religions as well. Whereas here in Canada, we typically have about 4 or 5 federal parties to choose from. So we're kind of more open to a lot of stuff. I do think that with these political scenarios that at a national level, they really do have a stronger impact on people than most people realize. So, yeah, and you were asking, we were talking a bit about Neil deGrasse Tyson there as well. I think part of the reason why those people will defer to a term like agnosticism, which more addresses the knowledge about things rather than belief, is that they don't want to come across as offensive. And I think Neil deGrasse Tyson was quite smart to do that, because he was getting his start and people were asking him, and then he said that, and that a lot of religious people will have this misunderstanding, I've noticed, and they will think, oh, agnostic's not a problem, but atheism they always often conflate with anti-theism. So, and that's probably what he was really trying to avoid. So,
although the wrinkle there was when you listen to, let's say, a talk about the history of science, people will often describe the Enlightenment in the terms of, let's say, someone like Galileo, who was forced to modulate his ideas about the way the universe really works in order to oscillate the faithful, and kind of bend his ideas to make them more acceptable to the faithful. And I guess post-Enlightenment science is supposed to be an environment whereby you should just be able to say what the truth is, and if that happens to be discordant with respect to the tenets of one faith or another, then tough. So yeah, I suspect you're right in terms of if you look at scientists who essentially have a media career rather than a research career, I think that's hugely valuable. You know, my knowledge of physics, for example, is very much at a popular level, so I'm just 100% dependent on people like Brian Cox and Neil deGrasse Tyson and the great shows they produce. But the idea that they would adjust or modulate their language to find a way of describing things that is not offensive to the faithful, that kind of irks me a bit. You know, there's a touch of Galileo under house arrest because the Pope doesn't like heliocentrism about that.
Yeah. Well, in those times too, I think they did have anti-blasphemy legislation, and that's one of the reasons we had to get rid of it, is before people start using it to oppress people.
Yeah.
And fortunately, nobody, I think, has ever been charged under it here in Canada, at least not in recent history, for sure. And maybe the last 50 years, I've heard there hasn't been anything. It could even be longer. Some people say as long as the last 100. Canada's 150 years, so we're just a little over that now. And so to say 100 years is starting to push back quite a ways. But people, as far as I know, haven't found records of that. So it's good that the law really hasn't been used much. And I think that also helped to get it redacted.
Yeah.
When I look back at these claims from people saying, oh, these artists, they were all religious, so you need religion for art. And I'm thinking, you know, the church was the biggest employer then. If you wanted to get hired by them, you'd have to toe the line, whether you're religious or not. You'd have to show them that you are. So if that's what you have to do to put food on your table, you know, people will do that sort of thing. And they can just keep quiet about it. Nobody will know the better. You know, it's so to say for certain that some of these great artists or scientists from those days were religious is something I find to be a claim that is worth questioning.
Yeah, indeed. And I think you're right about blasphemy laws in terms of...
Oh, anti-blasphemy.
Anti-blasphemy laws, quite right.
I would say that our Charter of Rights and Freedoms are giving you blasphemy laws, because they're saying, yes, you can blaspheme.
Yes,
it's the anti-blasphemy laws, and this is
quite
something
right.
I see is a common thing that happens out there.
Quite right.
I'm being a bit pedantic, I know.
No, it's worth being precise. And we have the same issue, or had the same issue in Ireland, in that there hadn't been a prosecution for blasphemy for a very long time. In fact, there hadn't been a prosecution for blasphemy despite many people's best efforts to get prosecuted for blasphemy,
several people have tried to get prosecuted for
it. Tried really as hard as they could.
Wow, heroes! Those are heroes. You should put up a list. You should put a list together and make some kind of a digital plaque. These are people who are heroes, or tried to be at least.
Yes, indeed. And the now that the blasphemy provision in our Constitution is gone, my new favourite provision in the Irish Constitution is one that provides for deity's rights. So I won't get the words exactly from the top of my head, but it's something like our Constitution says that worship is due until a mighty God, which if you think about it, that doesn't give any citizens of the country any rights or entitlements. That gives God the right to be worshipped. Now, as I keep pointing out, God is yet to turn up in the Supreme Court to demand his rights, and maybe we could draw some conclusions from that. But yes, maybe one of these days, some God or another will turn up in the Irish Supreme Court and take a case. But in terms of the denominational breakdown in Canada, Randolph, in Ireland here, I think it's 78% Catholic at the last census. What does the breakdown look like in Canada? Are the religious monotone Christianity, or are the nuns creeping up? How does the breakdown look?
Okay, I'm just looking it up here because I don't have it at the top of my head. But it looks like about almost 39% Roman Catholic, and then other Christian 28.5%. This is based on census from Stats Canada, which is a reliable organization.
Yeah.
All the rest of the religions are down there, less than 4%. You've got Buddhism, Sikhism, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, and a whole bunch of others.
Yeah.
And then they're saying non-religious is almost 24%.
Okay.
So my feeling, but that's from 2011, and I do recall there was a later survey done that showed atheism, which is synonymous to non-religious, not believing deities, is much higher now. And I've heard some estimates just at the provincial level here in BC being over 57%. I haven't confirmed that. But each province is different. Like the more central provinces, we see religion rise up. Alberta, right next to us, has a much higher Christian demographic than what we have here in BC. So, and there are more prairies and more flat areas, and it's in Quebec. Right now it's hard to say. Like when we went to visit there back in our 150-year anniversary just a few years ago, it was, we see a lot of churches there because of the history, and and they're beautiful to go inside. Many of them, it's quite a nice trip to do. There are a lot of people that I noticed did have a cross hanging from their necks as their jewelry, and various people with tattoos of it as well. But it didn't seem all that different from percentage-wise to roughly from what I typically see here as well. So I really don't know what to make of it, but definitely it has been a subject in people's minds there lately, especially with the government trying to say people working for the federal government should not be advertising religions by wearing their religious identification while they're at work, which I actually think is not unreasonable. For example, if you're working in the government and you're a federal government or even provincial one, and you've got people coming for help, for example, and let's say you're working in a department where you're helping people who are, like, you're in the policing department, and somebody comes up because they've been abused by their religious spouse, and then they see you wearing the same religious adornments. Are they going to be a bit reluctant to report what's happened now and ask for help that they need? Because they're worried that your alignment might be with the religion, which is the reason for their abuse. This is this is important question that's often missed by the media, unfortunately.
Yeah, or if
Do you
you're
find it,
if
like,
you're if you have a crisis pregnancy and you want to talk to a public counselor, and that counselor has a Roman Catholic symbol, that's the kind of thing that we deal with in Ireland. Yeah, that kind of religiosity from state employees can be an issue. Although I should say I do have I have a religious tattoo myself. I forget the number. It's Leviticus 19:28.
Move over a bit. I can't see it.
It says Leviticus 19:28, which is
Okay.
I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not make tattoo marks on thy skin.
That's something too.
Oh, what you got?
This is it's hard to see. It's a phoenix with my wife's Chinese name on it.
Excellent.
I got
very,
that
very
first
good.
prize for her.
That's
So
cool.
I guess I've broken the same rule that you had.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's not finished, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I have a tattoo of God on my forearm. If you see, there's nothing there.
Good one.
Oh, it's with invisible ink. It's that
That's
new
it.
technology, right?
That's it. So, I mean, from what you're describing, that would never happen in America. That wouldn't even be brought up. I mean, the whole idea that your religion should almost be a part of your work is, ingrained here. And it's insane. We have police vehicles that they're putting the motto "In God We Trust" on it.
I saw that in the news.
Yeah. Of course, we had the big issue with clerks not issuing same-sex marriage license. Things like that.
Kim Davis.
They bring in.
Yeah.
But it's not even that. We have politicians. It's pretty much something that they automatically have to say, God bless American people and God bless America, or, something to that effect. But yet you guys actually have God in your national anthem, and you're telling me that it's not, that it's not as a big deal. I mean, is that as far as policies and politicians is religion in the state? Is there a clear divide and it's not an issue, or am I wrong?
Well, it depends on who you talk to.
Gotcha.
There are areas that you can go in Canada, or there are religious denominations that you can talk to people who are have very strong feelings about it. But I would say overall, most Canadians are probably pretty easygoing about it. I have encountered a few people who want to get the Conservatives reelected here at the federal level, and so that their thinking is that they can outlaw abortion, make it illegal. Well, we're a signatory on the International Declaration for Human Rights, and bodily autonomy is a human right. We're also right in our charter. It's slavery would actually be a violation if certain section, I forget which section that is, but cruel and unusual punishment would kind of be part of that. But I would say that would be a violation of Section 15, because it comes down to discriminating against people, and which is prohibited in Canada in our charter, which is part of our constitution. Mm-hmm. And that's Section 15 again. So the problem with outlawing pregnancy termination is, which is often called abortion, is that a government that does that is in effect enslaving pregnant people, making them carry that to term. And when you enslave pregnant people, you're basically, as a government, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, this is a separate class of people who have lesser rights than people who are not pregnant, and that would violate, again, Section 15, where everybody's supposed to be equal under the law. Mm-hmm. So if they're going to put in an anti-abortion legislation here, I'm quite confident that a lot of people are going to be fighting against it. And this is the issue that I'd raise as a legal one. The government doesn't have the authority to put in such a law in the first place, and such a law would be illegal. And that's how I would argue it, very right to the core of it. And changing the Constitution here probably wouldn't be as difficult as I think it is in the U.S. because of the way things are enshrined and enacted, but it would still be a big deal. And we have an interesting setup here with our charter. Prior to that, we have the Bill of Rights. And a lot of people mistakenly think that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms replaces that from the 1980s. But in fact, a lot of judges will defer to the Bill of Rights for things that the Charter doesn't cover and clarify.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I suppose just to compare that to Ireland, it's we're kind of weird, Seamus, in that we have a constitution which has God mentioned throughout. But I don't think, maybe I'm wrong on this, I don't think our anthem mentions God. I must look it up. I think our constitution is mostly about God, and our anthem is mostly about fighting the English, as far as I can remember. But in terms of the cops who have In God We Trust in the squad cars, Seamus, presume those cops don't wear a bulletproof vest then?
Oh, of course not, right? Why would they? God's gonna, keep them safe, obviously, Just what is it? What's the Catholic saint? Saint Michael, isn't that the saint of policemen?
Saint Michael, so I think you're right, yes.
Yeah, so just say a few prayers to Saint Michael, and everything will be okay. It'll stop the bad guys' bullets, much like the Matrix,
Exactly.
Just do one of those moves,
Exactly.
It'll be all right.
We do have in our national anthem reference to God. You're correct about that. But there are a lot of people singing it differently so that the God part is removed from it.
Oh,
and
wow.
There is quite a bit. There are a number of variations of that going on, and some just repeat the previous verse. And it sounds just fine. I do that. The other thing is that you're mentioning in the Constitution in Ireland, God is mentioned throughout. We do have it in our charter, a reference to God, but that's only at the preamble. Section 1 and 2 and whatnot, all the numbered sections don't have a reference to it. So because it's just the preamble, the introduction, it really doesn't have any clout, fortunately. It's not saying you must believe in this. In fact, under Section 2, one of the rights is freedom of conscience, which obviously what that means, and then there's freedom of religion as well. So, but it's important that none of the other rights be violated in the process. They're all equal rights. So freedom of religion doesn't mean you can stop people from talking. You can't limit women from talking in a church, for example, as a lot of religions like to limit. And things like that.
If in the anthem you wanted to replace God with Sidney Crosby, I don't think Seamus would complain.
Sidney Crosby, okay. Not Roger Whittaker?
No, I'm just outside of Pittsburgh. Yeah, I'm just outside of Pittsburgh, so I've been a diehard Penguin fan for years. So.
Okay, we can replace with anybody. I'm okay with it.
Okay.
So probably Sidney Crosby would be a nice, refreshing change.
Not a big hockey guy yourself, or? No.
I find sports generally pretty boring.
Okay.
I'll watch the final games and cheer for our country, and or cheer for our province, or if our country's not in it, we'll cheer for whatever's closest to us in the States. In the U.S. So. So sometimes we're rooting for you guys.
We do the opposite, Randolph. Whenever we're not in the tournament, we just cheer for whoever's playing against England.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's really good. That's brilliant.
We covered quite a lot of ground there, including abortion and normalizing the word atheist. Are there any other aspects of your campaigns that?
I'll just clarify about the abortion thing, because there is a complaint that comes up a lot of the time, is that men are giving opinions and making decisions on women's choice. And it's kind of like a bunch of cats deciding what the rights of mice should be. Mm-hmm. I've seen this somewhere on the internet. I can't take credit for that, unfortunately. I think it's really well stated. But as far as my position on it goes, to clarify, it's a freedom to have bodily autonomy. It's everybody's entitled to this. Every person, regardless of sex or sexual orientation or anything like that, or whether or not you're pregnant. So by being a free decision, it is one that doesn't require justification. So some of these lawmakers who want to come across as seemingly reasonable by saying, there must be a good reason, or not allowed in the last trimester, or things like that. I have to oppose it all, because if it really is bodily autonomy, if we're going to take human rights seriously, then we have to support that all the way through as something that does not require justification at all from the pregnant person. It's their decision entirely, and it has to be a free decision with no pressures or anything like that that would try to interfere with that.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, to me, that's very important to advocate for the freedom of that. So it has to be, it can't be somebody else making the decision there for people with sound mind and all that kind of stuff, or anything, right?
Sure. And in terms of the various...
You're asking about some other things.
Yes, indeed.
Right.
So what else is taking up your time with respect to the secular campaigns, Randolph?
Okay, so there's a few things. I've been we're still a small group, so we're still growing and still getting a start, but because we're just recently started, just within the last few years. But there's blood donations. We're getting people to sign up with Canadian Blood Services because it's a wonderful thing to help people you don't even know, and donating blood's a great way to do it. So I've encountered quite a few people who say they can't donate because their blood's tainted, or because of the history of where they've lived between certain years. There's different restrictions.
Yeah.
Canadian Blood Services has recently updated their policies. Now they're accepting tainted blood, which is used for scientific research. Okay. So now everybody can donate, even if you have a dangerous disease, for regular donation for people to help people. It can still be used by research scientists, so you can still help. So this is great because it includes more people who can be helpful on this. The other things, I've recently written a letter to the Catholic Register, which is a news publication here that's very pro-Catholic, obviously by their name, and they were complaining about certain things in Canada that aren't going well. I'll just quickly look that up here because I want to make sure I get the details right on this. There's, let's see here. Yeah, so they're making some claims about religious liberty is diminishing in Canada. Their words were a bit harsher than that, and so I wrote an open letter back to them back in May 7th of this year, 2019, to disagree with that and point out that no, it's not diminishing, and their rights haven't been taken away. So it's we had some stuff going on with Trinity Western University the last few years that they had some covenant that everybody has to sign who attends their law university, and they were trying to oppress people and say, look, you have to declare that you are a Christian in order to be part of our school. Mm-hmm. But this, of course, violates our Charter of Rights and Freedoms again. So they ended up going all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sided with our rights, which are protected under our charter, under our Constitution. So Trinity University now cannot enforce a covenant on law students. Mm-hmm. So, and it's a big law school. So this is a major improvement. It's the wheels are turning slowly, just like they are for you in Ireland.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so those are kind of two major things that we've been working on.
Cool. That's
the other
impressive.
thing would be interesting. Yeah. So I'm concerned, of course, about what the NIFB is doing, and I'm certainly interested in having a debate with them. There's a couple of people who telling me they want to see it, and so some attempts have been made to contact them. No response yet. My guess is they're probably quite busy because they have. They're probably getting a lot of communications from people because of the controversial nature of what they're saying. Like they're making claims like they think that according to the Bible, as they read it, they follow King James as far as I can tell, that all the homosexual people should be lined up and shot by the government. I disagree with this, of course. It's a violation of their human rights. It's a violation of it's not human decency. It's psychopathic in my view.
I'm
So
sure Westboro must be jealous, about this.
yeah, their shtick is more doing protests at funerals. So
Yeah.
they'll probably be there waiting afterwards to take care of things. It's they'll the NIFB do their stuff first, and then they'll come to the funerals to stop that, because that's what they're known for.
Yeah. The NFB was probably sitting around. Can we somehow be a little bit more biblical than the Westboro Baptist Church? I know. It's like, really.
Wow. Yeah.
Oh boy, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
So I know another important thing for you is parenting in a secular position. So I didn't know if you want to elaborate on that point of view.
Oh, I think teaching critical thinking to children is a very important thing to do, because it gives them an intellectual tool set that they can use in their adult lives, that will help them and also help them help others. Because if children can think critically on their own, it's more difficult for people to trick them, to play scams on them, to take advantage of them. We've been teaching our kids from a very early age. Like, there is a common tendency of many parents to say things like, "Oh, don't do that, you'll get hurt."
Mm-hmm.
Our approach, my wife and I, what we do is we'll say to our kids, "If you do that, you could get hurt." And then we leave it up to them to decide. And here's how you could get, this is why this is dangerous, or something like that. Or this is what could happen. We also, we instead of using the kind of authoritarian approach with, which comes naturally and common for a lot of people, and it works generally pretty well, but we find for our kids a better approach is to just have them think about what they're doing and decide for themselves. And do it try to do it without putting pressure on what they should do. Sometimes they'll ask us, "What do you think?" And then we'll examine the different choices with them so that they get used to, this is the process of thinking about your different options. We also teach them that when it comes to elections, when it's a free vote, for example, you don't have to vote. When you abstain, you're in effect delegating your vote to everybody else and making all their votes worth a little bit more. And so if half the people abstained, then the people who do vote, two instead of one. It's nice to point that out to them. So what happened in school one day, our older daughter came home and said she was in it was many months after we talked about this. She said they had a vote in class. And so she didn't have an opinion either way on it. It didn't matter to her which activity they were going to choose. So she abstained. And then some of the kids were saying, "Oh, no, you have to vote." She says, "No, I don't. I'm actually equally in favor of both options. So I'm deciding not to vote. I'm abstaining so that everybody else can make the decision." And the teacher fortunately recognized this and said, "That's correct." So that's actually, and then she elaborated on it and taught all the kids. So it was quite nice that these things play out this way. But wow, the kids really tried to put pressure on her to vote, and she didn't. I was real proud of her for that. She did great.
That's great.
So this kind of critical thinking stuff, and people with young children, they can start very, very early on. Like, one of the things I've noticed is a lot of children will be hesitant to make a decision because they've not been conditioned to think for themselves. Conditioning is probably the best word I can come up with right now for this. So to think for themselves and get comfortable with making decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm aware, Randolph, we're pushing up on an hour now. We can't suck up your entire day. But just before we let you go, would you mind letting people know where's the best place to stay in touch with you and your work?
Oh, okay. So I do have my own website, which is randolfrichard.com. It's RANDOLFRICHARD.com, which I am the founding president of, which is available at CanadianAtheists.ca. So that's plural.
Excellent.
So CanadianAtheists. And we are accepting membership all the time. So people are always
Perfect.
welcome to join. And or you can even just, if all you want to do is donate blood, you can sign up for that there as well. There's a link that'll take you to Canadian Blood Services with our Partners for Life group code already put into there for you.
That's great. So we'll
thank you in advance
encourage people
to everybody
check
who
that
wants
out.
to help out with that.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And listen, thanks a lot for your time today, Randolph. That was a lot of fun. It's much appreciated.
It was my pleasure. I appreciate you bringing me on the show. Thank you.
Cool. Okay.
Thanks
listen,
again.
Take care. All the best. Bye.
Take care. You too.
Bye now. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Cool. So I think when we did our episode on Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Cox, we suspected we might be somewhat out on a limb, Seamus, but since then we've had more than one person take the same view as us in terms of normalizing the word atheism. So that's gratifying to see.
Yeah, I think Randolph's done a lot of great work up in Canada, trying to make atheism normal up there, and also helping down here. I definitely hope that he gets a debate with the NIFB.
That would be cool.
Yeah, that would be really good. I think he would do very well. So, but anywho, that's the show, folks. Definitely follow and check out Randolph Richardson's work in Canadian Atheists as well. As for us, you probably know, or you'll know soon, how to keep up with us in the show. But on Twitter, we're John at John Hamill at John Hamill 151, and myself, Seamus, at the FD Prophet. Until next time, folks, remember the freedom of thought can be given away, not taken away. Bye, everybody.
Bye, folks.